death. Is it the end? Researchers have been hard at work for centuries trying to uncover its mysteries, physical and metaphysical. In the edition of Avatars of the Astral Worlds, we'll be looking at the possibility of returning to this plane of reality through the process of reincarnation. What is reincarnation? Reincarnation, also known as rebirth or transmigration, is the philosophical or religious concept that the non-physical essence of a living being begins a new life in a different physical form or body after biological death. Resurrection is a similar process hypothesized by some religions, in which a soul returns to life in the same body. In most beliefs involving reincarnation, the soul is seen as immortal, and the only thing that becomes perishable is the body. Upon death, the soul becomes transmigrated into a new infant or animal to live again. The term transmigration means passing the soul from one body to another after death. Reincarnation punarjanma is a central tenet of the Indian religions, such as Buddhism, Hinduism, Jainism, Sikhism, and most paganism. However, some Hindu and pagan groups do not believe in reincarnation, but in an afterlife. In various forms, it occurs as an esoteric belief in many streams of Judaism in different aspects, in some beliefs of the indigenous peoples of the Americas and some indigenous Australians. However, most believe in an afterlife or spirit world. A belief in rebirth or metempsychoses was held by Greek historical figures, such as Pythagoras, Socrates, and Plato, as well as in various modern religions. Although most denominations within Christianity and Islam do not believe that individuals reincarnate, particular groups within these religions do refer to reincarnation. These groups include the mainstream historical and contemporary followers of Cathars, Alawites, the Druze, and the Rosicrucians. The historical relations between these sects and the beliefs about reincarnation that were characteristic of Neoplatonism, Orphism, Hermeticism, Manichaeism, and Gnosticism of the Roman era, as well as the Indian religions, have been the subject of recent scholarly research. Many Europeans and North Americans have developed an interest in reincarnation in recent decades, and many contemporary works mention it. The history of reincarnation. The origins of the notion of reincarnation are obscure. Discussion of the subject appears in the philosophical traditions of India. The Greek pre-Socratics discussed reincarnation, and the Celtic Druids are also reported to have taught a doctrine of reincarnation. The concepts of the cycle of birth and death, samsara, and liberation partly derive from ascetic traditions that arose in India around the middle of the first millennium BCE. The first textual references to the idea of reincarnation appear in the Upanishads of the late Vedic period, predating the Buddha and the Mahavira. Though no direct evidence of this has been found, the tribes of the Ganges Valley or the Dravidian traditions of South India have been proposed as another early source of reincarnation beliefs. The idea of reincarnation, samsara, did not exist in the early Vedic religions. The early Vedas do not mention the doctrine of karma and rebirth, but mention the belief in an afterlife. It is in the early Upanishads, which are pre-Buddha and pre-Mahavira, that these ideas are developed and described in a general way. Detailed descriptions first appear around the mid-first millennium BCE in diverse traditions, including Buddhism, Jainism, and various schools of Hindu philosophy, each giving unique expression to the general principle. The texts of ancient Jainism that have survived into the modern era are post-Mahavira, likely from the last centuries of the first millennium BCE, and extensively mention rebirth and karma doctrines. The Jaina philosophy assumes that the soul jiva in Jainism, Atman in Hinduism, exists and is eternal, passing through cycles of transmigration and rebirth. After death, reincarnation into a new body is asserted to be instantaneous in early Jaina texts. Depending upon the accumulated karma, rebirth happens into a higher or lower bodily form, either in heaven or hell or the earthly realm. No physical form is permanent, everyone dies and reincarnates further. However, liberation of Kevalia from reincarnation is possible through removing and ending karmic accumulations to one's soul. From the early stages of Jainism, a human being was considered the highest mortal being, with the potential to achieve liberation, mainly through asceticism. The early Buddhist texts discussed rebirth as part of the doctrine of samsara. This asserts that the nature of existence is a suffering-laden cycle of life, death, and rebirth without beginning or end. Also referred to as the Wheel of Existence Bhavicakra, it is often mentioned in Buddhist texts with the term Punarpava rebirth, rebecoming. Liberation from this cycle of existence, nirvana, is the foundation and the most crucial purpose of Buddhism. Buddhist texts also assert that an enlightened person knows his previous births, a knowledge achieved through high levels of meditative concentration. Tibetan Buddhism discusses death, bardo, an intermediate state, and rebirth in texts, such as the Tibetan Book of the Dead. While nirvana is taught as the ultimate goal in Theravadan Buddhism and is essential to Mahayana Buddhism, the vast majority of contemporary lay Buddhists focus on accumulating good karma and acquiring merit to achieve a better reincarnation in the next life. In early Buddhist traditions, samsara cosmology consisted of 5 realms through which the wheel of existence cycled. This included hell's Nuriya, hungry ghosts, pretas, animals Turiyak, humans Manusya, and gods Devas heavenly. In latter Buddhist traditions, this list grew to 6 realms of rebirth, adding demigods Asuras. The earliest layers of Vedic text incorporate the concept of life, followed by an afterlife in heaven, and hell based on cumulative virtues merit or vices demerit. However, the ancient Vedic rishis challenged this idea of the afterlife as simplistic because people do not live equally moral or immoral lives. Among generally virtuous lives, some are more virtuous. At the same time, evil, too, has degrees. The texts assert that it would be unfair for people with varying degrees of virtue or vices to end up in heaven or hell in an either-or and disproportionate manner irrespective of how virtuous or vicious their lives were. They introduced the idea of an afterlife in heaven or hell in proportion to one's merit. Early texts of Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism share the concepts and terminology related to reincarnation. They also emphasize similar virtuous practices and karma as necessary for liberation and what influences future rebirths. For example, all 3 discuss various virtues, sometimes grouped as yamas and niyamas, such as nonviolence, truthfulness, non-stealing, non-possessiveness, compassion for all living beings, charity, and many others. Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism disagree in their assumptions and theories about rebirth. Hinduism relies on its foundational assumption that soul, self exists Atman or Atta, in contrast to the Buddhist belief that there is no soul, no self, Anatta or Anatman. Hindu traditions consider the soul the unchanging, eternal essence of a living being and what journeys across reincarnations until it attains self-knowledge. Buddhism, in contrast, asserts a rebirth theory without a self, and considers the realization of non-self or emptiness as nirvana nibbana. Thus, Buddhism and Hinduism have very different views on whether a self or soul exists, which impacts the details of their respective rebirth theories. The reincarnation doctrine in Jainism differs from those in Buddhism, even though both are non-theistic Esramana traditions. Jainism, in contrast to Buddhism, accepts the foundational assumption that the soul exists in jiva and asserts that the soul is involved in the rebirth mechanism. Further, Jainism considers asceticism as an essential means to spiritual liberation that ends all reincarnation, while Buddhism does not. The Orphic religion, which taught reincarnation about the 6th century BC, organized itself into mystery schools at Eleusis and elsewhere, and produced copious literature. Orpheus, its legendary founder, is said to have taught that the immortal soul aspires to freedom, while the body holds it prisoner. The wheel of birth revolves. The soul alternates between freedom and captivity round the wide circle of necessity. Orpheus proclaimed the need for the god's grace, Dionysus in particular, and self-purification until the soul has completed the spiral ascent of destiny to live forever. An association between Pythagorean philosophy and reincarnation was routinely accepted throughout antiquity, as Pythagoras also taught about reincarnation. However, unlike the Orphics, who considered metempsychoses a cycle of grief that could be escaped by attaining liberation from it, Pythagoras seems to postulate an eternal, neutral reincarnation where subsequent lives would not be conditioned by any action done in the previous. Surviving texts indicate that there was a belief in rebirth in Germanic paganism. Examples include figures from Eddic poetry and sagas, potentially through a process of naming and/or through the family line. Scholars have discussed the implications of these attestations and proposed theories regarding belief in reincarnation among the Germanic peoples before Christianization and potentially, to some extent, in folk belief after that. The belief in reincarnation developed among Jewish mystics in the medieval world, among whom differing explanations were given of the afterlife, although with a universal belief in an immortal soul. Today, reincarnation is an esoteric belief within many streams of modern Judaism. Kabbalah teaches a belief in Gilgul, transmigration of souls. Hence, the belief in reincarnation is universal in Hasidic Judaism, which regards the Kabbalah as sacred and authoritative, and is also held as an esoteric belief within modern Orthodox Judaism. In Judaism, the Zohar, first published in the 13th century, discusses reincarnation, especially in the Torah portion, Balak. The most comprehensive Kabbalistic work on reincarnation, Shar HaGilgulim, was written by Chaim Vital, based on the teachings of his mentor, the 16th century Kabbalist Isaac Luria, who was said to know the past lives of each person through his semi-prophetic abilities. The 18th century Lithuanian master scholar and Kabbalist Elijah of Vilna, known as the Vilna Gaon, authored a commentary on the biblical book of Jonah as an allegory of reincarnation. The practice of conversion to Judaism is sometimes understood within Orthodox Judaism regarding reincarnation. According to this school of thought in Judaism, non-Jews are drawn to Judaism because they had been Jews in their former life. Such souls may wander among nations through multiple lives until they find their way back to Judaism, including being born in a Gentile family with a lost Jewish ancestor. The extensive literature of Jewish folk and traditional stories refer to reincarnation. In Greco-Roman thought, the concept of metempsychoses disappeared with the rise of early Christianity, reincarnation being incompatible with the Christian core doctrine of salvation of the faithful after death. It has been suggested that some of the early church fathers, especially Origen, still entertained a belief in the possibility of reincarnation. Still, evidence is tenuous, and the writings of Origen, as they have come down to us, speak explicitly against it. Hebrews 9:27 states that men die once, but after this the judgment. Several Christian Gnostic sects professed reincarnation. The Sethians and followers of Valentinus believed in it. The followers of Bardason of Mesopotamia, a sect of the 2nd century deemed heretical by the Catholic Church, drew upon Chaldean astrology, to which Bardason's son Harmonius, educated in Athens, added Greek ideas, including a sort of metempsychoses. Taoist documents from the Han Dynasty claimed that Lao Tzu appeared on Earth as different persons in different times, beginning in the legendary era of 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors. In the 3rd century BC, Chuang Tzu states, "Birth is not a beginning. Death is not an end. There is existence without limitation. There is continuity without a starting point. Existence without limitation is space. Continuity without a starting point is time. There is birth, there is death, there is issuing forth, there is entering in." Around the 11th or 12th century in Europe, Several reincarnationist movements were persecuted as heresies through the establishment of the Inquisition in the Latin West. These included the Cathar, Patarine, or Albigensian Church of Western Europe, the Paulician movement, which arose in Armenia, and the Bogomils in Bulgaria. Christian sects such as the Bogomils and the Cathars, who professed reincarnation and other Gnostic beliefs, were referred to as Manichaean, and are today sometimes described by scholars as Neo-Manichaean. As there is no known Manichaean mythology or terminology in the writings of these groups, there has been some dispute among historians as to whether these groups indeed were descendants of Manichaeism. While reincarnation has been a matter of faith in some communities from an early date, it has also frequently been argued for on principle, as Plato does when he argues that the number of souls must be finite because souls are indestructible. Benjamin Franklin held a similar view. Sometimes such convictions, as in Socrates' case, arise from a more general personal faith, at other times from anecdotal evidence, such as Plato makes Socrates' offer in the myth of During the Renaissance, translations of Plato, the Hermetica, and other works fostered a new European interest in reincarnation. Marsilio Ficino argued that Plato's references to reincarnation were intended allegorically. Shakespeare alluded to the doctrine of reincarnation. Still, authorities burned Giordano Bruno at the stake after being found guilty of heresy by the Roman Inquisition for his teachings. But the Greek philosophical works remained available and, particularly in North Europe, were discussed by groups such as the Cambridge Platonists. By the 19th century, the philosophers Schopenhauer and Nietzsche could access the Indian scriptures to discuss the doctrine of reincarnation, which recommended itself to the American transcendentalists Henry David Thoreau, Walt Whitman, and Ralph Waldo Emerson, adapted by Francis Bowen into Christian metempsychoses. By the early 20th century, interest in reincarnation had been introduced into the nascent discipline of psychology, mainly due to the influence of William James. He raised aspects of the philosophy of mind, comparative religion, the psychology of religious experience, and the nature of empiricism. James was influential in founding the American Society for Psychical Research, also known as ASPR, in New York City in 1885, 3 years after the British Society for Psychical Research SPR was inaugurated in London, leading to the systematic, critical investigation of paranormal phenomena. Famous World War II American General George Patton was a firm believer in reincarnation, believing, among other things, he was a reincarnation of the Carthaginian general Hannibal. At this time, widespread awareness of reincarnation was boosted by the Theosophical Society's dissemination of systematized and universalized Indian concepts and the influence of magical societies like the Golden Dawn. Notable personalities like Annie Besant, W.B. Yeats, and Dion Fortune made the subject almost as familiar an element of the popular culture of the West as of the East. By 1924, the subject could be satirized in popular children's books. Humorist Don Marquis created a fictional cat named Mehetable, who claimed to be a reincarnation of Queen Cleopatra. Theodore Flowerdein was among the first to study a claim of past life recall in his investigation of the medium Helene Smith, published in 1900, in which he defined the possibility of cryptomnesia in such accounts. Carl Gustav Jung, like Flowerdein, based in Switzerland, also emulated him in his thesis on a study of cryptomnesia in psychism. Later, Jung would emphasize the importance of the persistence of memory and ego in the psychological research of reincarnation. This concept of rebirth necessarily implies the continuity of personality, that one is able, at least potentially, to remember that one has lived through previous existences, and that these existences were one's own. Hypnosis, used in psychoanalysis for retrieving forgotten memories, was eventually tried as a means of studying the phenomenon of past life recall. The Theosophical Society draws much of its inspiration from India. In the Theosophical worldview, Reincarnation is the vast rhythmic process by which the soul, the part of a person which belongs to the formless non-material and timeless worlds, unfolds its spiritual powers in the world and comes to know itself. It descends from sublime, free, spiritual realms and gathers experience through its effort to express itself in the world. Afterward, there is a withdrawal from the physical plane to higher levels of reality in death, purification, and assimilation of the past life. Having cast off all instruments of personal experience, it stands again in its spiritual and formless nature, ready to begin its next rhythmic manifestation, every lifetime bringing it closer to complete self-knowledge and self-expression. However, it may attract old mental, emotional, and energetic karma patterns to form the new personality. Anthroposophy describes reincarnation from the point of view of Western philosophy and culture. The ego is believed to transmute transient soul experiences into universals that form the basis for an individuality that can endure after death. These universals include ideas that are intersubjective and thus transcend the purely personal spiritual consciousness, intentionally creating human character, spiritual life, and becoming a fully conscious human being, spiritual humanity. Rudolf Steiner described the general principles he believed to be operative in reincarnation, such as that one's will activity in one life forms the basis for the thinking of the following and many successive lives of various individualities. Similarly, other famous people's life stories are not primarily the result of genes, upbringing, or biographical vicissitudes. Steiner relates that a martial feudal lord held a large estate in northeastern France during the early Middle Ages. During a military campaign, this estate was captured by a rival. The previous owner had no means of retaliating and was forced to see his property lost to an enemy. He was filled with a smoldering resentment towards the property classes, not only for the remainder of his life in the Middle Ages, but also in a much later incarnation as Karl Marx. His rival was reborn as Friedrich Engels. Reincarnation in our modern world. Inspired by Helena Blavatsky's major works, including Isses Unveiled and The Secret Doctrine, astrologers in the early 20th century integrated the concepts of karma and reincarnation into the practice of Western astrology. Notable astrologers who advanced this development included Alan Leo, Charles E. O. Carter, Mark Edmund Jones, and Dane Rediar. A new synthesis of East and West resulted as Hindu and Buddhist concepts of reincarnation were fused with Western astrology's deep roots in Hermeticism and Neoplatonism. In the case of Rediar, this synthesis was enhanced with the addition of Jungian depth psychology. This dynamic integration of astrology, reincarnation, and depth psychology has continued into the modern era with the work of astrologers Stephen Forrest and Jeffrey Wolf Green. Their respective schools of evolutionary astrology are based on an acceptance of the fact that human beings incarnate in a succession of lifetimes. Past reincarnation, usually termed past lives, is a vital part of the principles and practices of the Church of Scientology. Scientologists believe that the human individual is a thetan, an immortal spiritual entity that has fallen into a degraded state due to past life experiences. Scientology auditing is intended to free the person of these past life traumas and recover past life memory, leading to a higher state of spiritual awareness. This idea is echoed in their highest fraternal religious order, Sea Org, whose motto is Revenimus, we come back, and whose members sign a billion-year contract as a sign of commitment to that ideal. L. Ron Hubbard, the founder of Scientology, does not use the word reincarnation to describe its beliefs, noting that the common definition of reincarnation has been altered from its original meaning. The word has come to mean to be born again in different life forms, whereas its actual definition is to be born again into the flesh of another body. Scientology ascribes to this latter the original definition of reincarnation. The first writings in Scientology regarding past lives date from around 1951 and slightly earlier. In 1960, Hubbard published a book on past lives entitled Have You Lived Before This Life? In 1968, he wrote Mission into Time, a report on a 5-week sailing expedition to Sardinia, Sicily, and Carthage to see if specific evidence could be found to substantiate L. Ron Hubbard's recall of incidents in his past centuries ago. The Indian spiritual teacher Meher Baba stated that reincarnation occurs due to desires, and once those desires are extinguished, the ego mind ceases to reincarnate. Wicca is a neo-pagan religion focused on nature, guided by the philosophy of Wiccan that advocates the tenets harm none, do as you will. Wiccans believe in karmic return where one's deeds are returned, either in the current life or in another life, threefold or multiple times to teach one lesson, the threefold law. Reincarnation is therefore an accepted part of the Wiccan faith. Wiccans also believe that death and the afterlife are essential experiences for the soul to transform and prepare for future lifetimes. Before the late 19th century, reincarnation was a relatively rare theme in the West. In ancient Greece, the Orphic mysteries and Pythagoreans believed in various forms of reincarnation. Emanuel Swedenborg thought that we leave the physical world once, but then go through several lives in the spiritual world, a hybrid of Christian tradition and the popular view of reincarnation. More recently, many people in the West have developed an interest in and acceptance of reincarnation. Many new religious movements include reincarnation among their beliefs, such as modern neo-pagans, Spiritism, Astara, Dianetics, and Scientology. Many esoteric philosophies also have reincarnation, like Theosophy, Anthroposophy, Kabbalah, and Gnostic and esoteric Christianity, such as the works of Martinus Thompson. Demographic survey data from 1999 to 2002 shows a significant minority of people from Europe 22% and America 20% believe in the existence of life before birth and after death, leading to a physical rebirth. The belief in reincarnation is exceptionally high in the Baltic countries, with Lithuania having the highest figure for the whole of Europe, 44%. In contrast, the lowest figure is in East Germany, 12%. A quarter of U.S. Christians, including 10% of all born-again Christians, embrace the idea. Ian Stevenson reported that the belief in reincarnation is held with detailed variations by adherents of almost all major religions except Christianity and Islam. In addition, between 20 and 30% of persons in Western countries who may be nominal Christians also believe in reincarnation. According to Dr. Brian Weiss, in 1980, one of his patients, Catherine, began discussing past life experiences under hypnosis. Weiss did not believe in reincarnation at the time, but after confirming elements of Catherine's stories through public records, came convinced of the survival of a component of the human personality after death. Weiss claims he has regressed more than 4,000 patients since 1980. Neil Donald Walsh, an American author of the series Conversations with God, says his books are not channeled, but rather that God inspires them and that they can help a person relate to God from a modern perspective. Claims that he has reincarnated more than 600 times. Other influential contemporary figures that have written on reincarnation include Alice Ann Bailey, one of the first writers to use the terms New Age and Age of Aquarius, Torquem Saradarian, an Armenian-American musician and religious author, Dolores Cannon, Adel Gowland, Michael Newton, Bruce Grayson, Raymond Moody, and Unity Church founder Charles Fillmore. One 1999 study by Walter and Waterhouse reviewed the previous data on the level of reincarnation belief and performed a set of 30 in-depth interviews in Britain among people who did not belong to a religion advocating reincarnation. The authors reported that surveys have found that about 1/5 to 1/4 of Europeans believe in reincarnation, with similar results found in the USA in the interviewed group. The belief in the existence of this phenomenon appeared independent of their age or the type of religion that these people belonged to, with most being Christians. The beliefs of this group also did not appear to contain any more than usual New Age ideas broadly defined, and the authors interpreted their ideas on reincarnation as one way of tackling issues of suffering. Still, they noted that this seemed to have little effect on their private lives. Waterhouse also published a detailed discussion of beliefs expressed in the interviews. She noted that although most people hold their belief in reincarnation quite lightly and were unclear on the details of their ideas, personal experiences such as past life memories and near-death experiences had influenced most believers. However, only a few had direct experience of these phenomena. Waterhouse analyzed the influences of second-hand accounts of reincarnation, writing that most of the people in the survey had heard other people's interpretations of past lives from regression hypnosis and dreams, and found these fascinating, feeling that there must be something in it if other people had such experiences. For 40 years, psychiatrist Ian Stevenson from the University of Virginia conducted more than 2,500 case studies of young children who claimed to remember past lives. He published 12 books, including 20 cases suggestive of reincarnation, and biology, a contribution to the etiology of birthmarks and birth defects, a 2-part monograph, and where reincarnation and biology intersect. In his cases, he documented the child's statements and testimony from family members and others, often correlating to a deceased person who, in some ways, seemed to match the child's memory. Stevenson also investigated cases where birthmarks and congenital disabilities seemed to match wounds and scars on the deceased. Sometimes included in his documentation were medical records like autopsy photographs. Expecting controversy and skepticism, Stevenson also searched for disconfirming evidence and alternative explanations for the reports. However, as the Washington Post reported, he concluded that no standard explanation sufficed in scores of cases. Other academic researchers who have undertaken similar pursuits include Jim B. Tucker, Antonia Mills, Satwant Pasricha, Godwin Samararatne, and Erlanger Haraldson, but Stevenson's publications remain the most well-known. Stevenson's work in this regard was impressive enough to Carl Sagan that he referred to what were Stevenson's investigations in his book, The Demon-Haunted World, as an example of carefully collected empirical data. Though he rejected reincarnation as a parsimonious explanation for the stories, he wrote that the phenomenon of alleged past life memories should be further researched. Sam Harris cited Stevenson's works in his book The End of Faith as part of a body of data that seems to attest to the reality of psychic phenomena but only relied on subjective personal experience. Some research suggests that past life memories may be formed by false memories or may be hoaxes. Some scholars consider retrieving past life memory techniques, such as past life regression, a pseudoscience. Skepticism and reincarnation. Skeptic Carl Sagan asked the Dalai Lama what he would do if a fundamental tenet of his religion, reincarnation, were definitively disproved by science. The Dalai Lama answered, "If science can disprove reincarnation, Tibetan Buddhism would abandon reincarnation, but it's going to be mighty hard to disprove reincarnation." Sagan considered claims of memories of past lives worthy of research, although he considered reincarnation to be an unlikely explanation for these. Critics of Stevenson's work include Paul Edwards, who criticized the accounts of reincarnation as being purely anecdotal and cherry-picked. Edwards says such stories are attributable to selective thinking, suggestion, and false memories resulting from the family's or researchers' belief systems, and thus cannot be counted as empirical evidence. The philosopher Keith Augustine wrote in a critique that the vast majority of Stevenson's cases come from countries where a religious belief in reincarnation is strong and rarely elsewhere, seems to indicate that cultural conditioning, rather than reincarnation, generates claims of spontaneous past life memories. Further, Ian Wilson pointed out that many of Stevenson's cases consisted of poor children remembering wealthy lives or belonging to a higher caste. In these societies, claims of reincarnation are sometimes used as schemes to obtain money from the richer families of alleged former incarnations. Stevenson later published a book of cases from a cultural area where belief in reincarnation is not mainstream, European cases of the reincarnation type. Even still, Robert Baker asserted that all the past life experiences investigated by Stevenson and other parapsychologists are understandable regarding known psychological factors, including a mixture of cryptomnesia and confabulation. Edwards also objected that reincarnation invokes assumptions that are inconsistent with modern science. As the vast majority of people do not remember previous lives and there is no empirically documented mechanism that allows personality to survive death and travel to another body, positing the existence of reincarnation is subject to the principle that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Researchers such as Stevenson acknowledged these limitations. Stevenson also claimed a handful of cases suggested xenoglossy evidence, including 2 where a subject under hypnosis allegedly conversed with people speaking the foreign language instead of merely being able to recite foreign words. Sarah Thomason, a linguist and skeptical researcher at the University of Michigan, reanalyzed these cases, concluding that the linguistic evidence is too weak to provide support for the claims of xenoglossy. Some authors, Stevenson not among them, have given much importance to supposed past life memories retrieved under hypnosis during past life regressions. Such imagined memories have been critiqued as containing historical inaccuracies originating from modern popular culture, shared beliefs about history, or books that discuss historical events. Experiments with subjects undergoing past life regression indicate that a belief in reincarnation and suggestions by the hypnotist are the 2 most important factors regarding the contents of memories reported. Using hypnosis and suggestive questions can tend to leave the subject particularly likely to hold distorted or false memories. Rather than recall a previous existence, the source of the memories is more likely cryptomnesia and confabulations that combine experiences, knowledge, imagination, and suggestion or guidance from the hypnotist. Once created, those memories are indistinguishable from those based on events during the subject's life. Past life regression has been critiqued for being unethical because it lacks any evidence to support its claims and increases one's susceptibility to false memories. Lewis Corden states that this can be problematic as it creates delusions under the guise of therapy. The memories are experienced as being as vivid as those based on events experienced in one's life and impossible to differentiate from true memories of actual events. Accordingly, any damage can be difficult to undo. Some APA-accredited organizations have challenged the use of past life regressions as a therapeutic method, calling it unethical. Additionally, the hypnotic methodology that underpins past life regression has been criticized as placing the participant in a vulnerable position, susceptible to the implantation of false memories. Because the implantation of false memories may be harmful, Gabriel Andrade argues that past life regression violates the principle of first, do no harm non-maleficence, part of the Hippocratic Oath. What do you believe? And if you die and come back, will you still believe those same things? It's fascinating to imagine where this will all lead. We'll have to leave the doors open for the avatars of astral worlds for answers.